That was the only time I actually cross-country skied to an actual birth.
And I felt my entire vehicle got lifted up and moved like into the opposite lane.
He's like, hey, there's a medevac flight leaving Nome right now, and I got you a ride back.
I stepped outside and the sky was green and I could hear the tornado.
We all breathe the same air, said John F. Kennedy. In Western esoteric and New Age traditions, the entirety of the world's energy has 5 associated elements, namely earth, fire, water, air, and spirit. Today we focus on air. The air element corresponds in Eastern parts of creation. It symbolizes a vast network of vital breath, from the winds that brought the universe into being to the first cry of a newborn baby or first breath of life, even the Om. Where earth is fixed, air is most definitely a mover. It is also connected to the mind, wisdom, spirits, and the soul. Classical Greek philosophy separated the air element into the atmosphere, where we live, and a higher region above the clouds, where they wrote about as air. It was the lower form versus ether, something filled with light energy. Aristotle went so far as to consider ether something that created celestial spheres. In sacred geometry, the symbol for air is the octahedron, cementing the air element between fire and water alchemically. Now, before that sounds overwhelming, remember that the Greeks loved sounding lofty. On a much simpler level, this means that air energy can work with fire or water, and it also can become an intermediary or a bridge between the two. In Hindu writings, the word for wind is vata, which means to blow. This is also a second word, prana, that symbolizes the breath of life. Prana is a father god, and his breath is one of the 5 sacred elements of this religious tradition. The element of air is an excellent representation of our spiritual faith. Air reminds us that there is so much more to this world than we can see, and also teaches that we must grow and change as the world does likewise. William Arthur Ward said, "The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change, but the realist just adjusts their sails." We cannot capture or tame the air, but we certainly know it's with us. It can be tempestuous or still, or as gentle as a puff on a birthday candle. Welcome back to the second episode in the podcast mini-series called Midwives and the Elements. And join us as we listen to midwives as they share their battle through and with this omnipresent element.
For our first story, we're starting in Alaska, because midwives in Alaska don't just have long drives, they also sometimes have long flights. This is the story of taking 2 flights to catch a baby.
I am Jennifer Cave, and I am a midwife in Alaska. I practice in Soldotna, Alaska. I run a birth center here. I have been in the state here since 2010. I practiced in the Philippines before that. So we get lots of fun, drive around in snowstorms, of course. But one time I was serving a family out in Nome, Alaska, which people who are familiar with the Iditarod understand where that is. It's very remote. This was their 3rd baby with me. And so we made a plan, and they called me when she went into labor. And of course, there was no flights that night. So I got on the very first flight, like 5 a.m. the next morning, to head to Nome from Anchorage, Alaska. I should preface that I'm a little bit fearful of flying. My parents unfortunately died in a plane crash when I was in my 20s, but I did grow up flying. So anyways, Nome is not the best airport to fly into. It's one of those runways that's one shot. And so we fly, it's about 2-hour flight. And it's foggy, and they let us know that it could be a little rough landing. So when we come down under the fog, we're not lined up with the airport strip. And so they basically just go straight back up. Right. So it's a little bit like, oh my gosh, get your adrenaline running. And then they attempt this 3 times. By the 3rd time, I thought I might lose, well, my sanity or something. Because literally you can see nothing until you're like, it feels like feet away from the runway, and then you're not lined up, and then they just go straight up into the air. And so it's a little bit nerve-wracking. And so by the time they announced that we're turning back around, we're going back to Anchorage, sorry, I'm like, well, this mom's been in labor at this point for, 12 hours or so. I'm not going to make this birth. I'm in first class. There's free drinks. We'll just say a couple were consumed. I get back to the Anchorage airport, like I'm still shaking from this whole ordeal. And I'm literally sitting on the bathroom toilet, and the dad calls me. Now, the dad is a medevac pilot. The mom is a medevac nurse. And I'm like finishing peeing in a stall. Sorry to be crass, but that's what I'm doing. When he calls me, he's like, hey, there's a medevac flight leaving Nome right now. So in a couple hours, it's going to be turning around and coming back. And I got you a ride back on this medevac flight. Which means I didn't just go in a regular commercial airplane. Now I'm going in a small plane that basically seats, 4 people in a stretcher. So I'm like, oh, fantastic. As I'm like, I think I should probably drink some coffee and such before I drive over to this other part of the airport so that I can get on this other plane. So thankfully, a few hours had passed, and I get on this plane. I may have done a lot of praying because it's a rough flight. The weather's not fantastic. There's a lot of bouncing around in that little plane. We do land safely. By this time, it's evening. So, I started the journey. I had to leave my home, I think, at 4 a.m. And I want to say it's like 5 p.m. now. By the time I land in Nome, the mom is still laboring just a little bit. And they sit me down. I get a bowl of soup, which is like my first food of the day. I have a bowl of soup, and legitimately her water breaks, and it was like game on, baby. So I was like, I think that baby waited for me. But it was, yeah, definitely. And then of course, when I went to leave the town, I couldn't get out for a couple of days because it was too foggy. So yeah, it's definitely a fun. Yeah, I don't do flight type of flying births hardly ever. You can come to me now. I have a birth center.
Let's go now to Colorado and listen from longtime midwife Candace, who not only set out 40 years ago to attend a birth in a snowstorm, but she braved her way through blowing winds on skis. Let's listen in.
My name is Candace Joanne. I'm a certified nurse midwife. I've been a nurse for 50 years and a nurse midwife for greater than 47 years. So I've had a variety of experiences. I'd like to tell you a story about when I was in Colorado. It's more than 40 years past. At that time, I was doing home births as well as a couple of other part-time jobs. The reason why we left the East Coast to go to this area in Colorado, it's in southern Colorado in Riveted County. We left because my husband had family, some extended family there. They were all getting very old, and he wanted their history. So that's how I ended up leaving a university and then a private practice to go to that area. So it's pretty remote. It was a very established community of ranchers, wide diversity of people there. They might have a mixed Hispanic, maybe some Native. There was a lot of people who had joined communes. And at that time that I was there, the communes weren't functioning completely, but it still was more community than it was the massive communes. They had divided up into smaller family units. I ended up working at a small clinic called La Clinica. And there we provided some basic healthcare services. We checked on people. They dropped by our house if they had a problem. And we also did some births at that time. So this story is about a birth where I was living in it was not right in the Gardner area. It was a little bit away from there, a place called Chama, way out in the country. I was called to a birth. Remember, we didn't have cell phones. So there were elaborate ways where people told us, and I can't remember now how I got notified. I think at that time I had just gotten a phone put in. And so maybe they were able to actually call me at my house. But we'd had a major snowstorm, and it was going to be hard to get to a birth. It was a young couple, a young Hispanic couple. They were kind of way out in the country, and they had not cleared the roads from this major snowstorm that we had. So I ended up having to backpack my gear. And actually, my husband accompanied me because I carried things like oxygen tanks and, some emergency equipment just in case. So it's kind of heavy to carry when you're trying to balance yourself on cross-country skis to get there. It had stopped. The blizzard was over, but it was still really windy. I just remember that. So I was grateful for his help to get, to go with me to get out to the area. I can't remember exactly how far we skied, but it was a little bit of a trip. As far as the birth was concerned, it was a young couple. Again, this was more than 40 years ago. I remember everything went very normally. It was a good family experience. Often, extended family will be there. Usually at our home births, there was an RN who would usually come, or sometimes we had a family doctor who also sometimes would also go. So we tried to have two people as much as possible. Coming home was a little bit easier. I think by that time they cleared roads, so I didn't have to ski home. I remember for that particular birth, I was paid with a pile of pinon. We still bartered a little bit there. A lot of people didn't have a lot of extra money. Not all of them were on Medicaid or had any insurance. And actually, the clinic was a sort of a donation-run clinic anyway. So I got paid it with a pile of wood that actually ended up breaking our maul. We had to go get another maul because it was so hard. So that's the main thing I remember from that birth. We certainly had many times where it was hard to get to people. Most of the time I did go by car, but the roads were dirt roads often and pretty rough. But that was the only time I had to ski to a birth. I skied once to my job at Planned Parenthood before, but that was the only time I actually cross-country skied to an actual birth.
Take a quick break from this yummy episode, and let's talk about the Midwifery Wisdom Experience. Why do midwives conference? And yes, I say it kind of like a verb, but that's exactly because it's a lot of frickin' work to go to a conference. You have to take time off call. You have to take time away from your family. You have to spend money flying or driving or training and staying in a hotel. And sometimes it's not always what you expect it to be, because really we expect our time away from all of those things to be incredible. You know what? We expect it to be an experience. And to be honest, in my opinion, that's exactly what the 2023 Midwifery Wisdom Experience held in November, Denver, Colorado is. I conference because I like to fangirl. I like to get a chance to drink a French 75 with Christine Loria, or talk about balancing with Nicole Morales in a hotel room, right? I conference because I want to be around the people that I follow on social media, but for it to be real life. I conference to get the CEUs and to be there for the possibility of the learning. I want to take it away. I want to go back. I want to bring my community to this community, but that community home. But really, I gotta say, last year in 2022, the midwifery wisdom experience felt like being at the best part of the births while being away from births. The energy, the space full of midwives and birth workers was like no other. While we're sold out of skills and drills in the 2023 retreat, the Midwifery Wisdom Conference tickets are still available, including the post-conference workshops. If you haven't already, go ahead and check us out, midwiferywisdom.com/experience. Why do you conference? Find out this November in Denver.
Well, I've got a story for you now. I used to practice in Oregon, and I was called to assist a number of midwives over the years. One time in the middle of August, one of the hottest on records, I got called out to assist a newer midwife with one of her primate clients. Southern Oregon, right at the California border, about 11 miles or so from the California border, is hot in the summer. It's a little bit at elevation, but it just sort of bakes. It's not at all like, really extraordinary San Francisco weather. At the further north you go, before you hit the rainforest of Washington, it is hot, highland desert kind of feel. If you've ever looked up temperatures for Redding, California, very similar. It is 100 all summer. Now it's dry, so it's a dry kind of a heat, but it is hot. And this young woman had been laboring all day as a first-time mom, doing what first-time moms do, sitting and standing and laying and walking and talking and eating. And she was especially drinking. And she was drinking because her midwife and her mama and her husband were all encouraging her to, quote, stay hydrated in this heat. And so this is part of the air episode, because the heat, the air around us can change everything. So I didn't arrive until after dark, because our deal with backing each other up is that usually the backup midwife arrives around transition so that we don't exhaust each other. We can save some of those long labor hours that just need watchful attention and careful assistance. We can save that for one person. And this midwife and I had a mutual student between us, two students actually. And so one of them, this was her first birth that she was attending with us as a new student, and the other was more experienced. We sat together. The mom had been in the tub and had gone into her room, and we were sitting and visiting, and we had some watermelon. It was still quite hot, even though the sun had gone down. And I saw two empty jugs that looked like milk jugs, but they had water labels on them. And so I just sort of laughingly inquired, like, who's been drinking all this water? And the new student spoke up and she said, oh, the mom has. And I looked at her kind of like confused. I was like, this mom has drank 2 gallons of water today? And she enthusiastically nodded. The other midwife was in the room taking heart tones or being with her. And I had this experience, like when I remember it now, I think back to that time, that moment, and it's like slow motion. Like, whenever you have something where you can like see something coming, you can't move fast enough. Like you don't feel like you're present enough. And so as I was looking at this student with this like really puzzled, worried look on my face, I started to hear the other midwife scream. And so I like, again, it's like in molasses in my mind as I'm like running towards the bedroom being like, I see the problem. So I went into the room and the mother is having a full grand mal seizure. And she has bitten her tongue and her mouth is bleeding and her body is convulsing. And the midwife had just checked her cervix and she was, just 9 with a little lip. And she had felt pressure. And so she was getting ready to deliver. I kind of, again, everything moved too slow. I couldn't really fully get out the words, but the solution that I could come up with that in a moment, because she can't eat any salt. She's hyponatremic, right? She's floated her liver. Doesn't have enough salt. And now she's seizing. And so I directed the new student to call 911 and I helped to contain her, restrain her during her seizure. And gosh, that can be the longest time of your life. And it ended up being at least a 5-minute seizure. And it honestly could have been 7 or 8 minutes. She shook violently and was unreachable, unconscious for what just felt like forever. I tried to place an IV during that time because I was thinking we can at least get some lactated ringers in that has cell salts, including sodium. But she was so violent in her shaking that it was impossible for me to stabilize an arm during that time. The paramedics came very quickly, but in this, I really I should say EMS, emergency medical service, none of them were paramedics. In this rural region of Oregon, it's a volunteer fire department essentially that shows up as EMS. And they had an ambulance and they were big, strong men willing to help, but they had no medical knowledge, certainly nothing that would know more than what we knew. I helped move her and we all helped move her. It took every one of us to get her onto the gurney and out the door. And I was like, you can place an IV on the way. We are moving now. I was listening to heart tones and the baby was still in the 120s. Once we were in the ambulance, her seizure ceased, but she was incredibly combative post-seizure and not conscious in the way that you would expect someone to be. She grunted, but she didn't she didn't complete words or sentences, and she wouldn't allow us to do any kind of placement. The EMTs were able to kind of lay across her to hold one arm to get an IV in, and they would help me kind of get heart tones. But she was very combative and very unconscious in her actions and behavior. While we were in the ambulance, I called ahead to the hospital and I got the doc on call for walk-ins. And I was able to communicate to her the situation. And luckily, I guess it was either my use of SBAR or the urgency, the emergency of the tone of voice I was using. But usually this incredibly dismissive and almost punitive hospital system, this particular doctor in it really heard me and heard what needed to happen. And I told her, like, I have just checked the baby, these combative grunty moves, her body is still pushing and her baby is just inside, +2, maybe even almost visible at the introitus. And I highly recommend, given this situation, that you vacuum the baby out and not take her back for a cesarean. And this is what I think it is. And I think an urgent delivery will happen if you just use this vacuum. And so she agreed. It was a 45-minute transport. We were very far in the rural Oregon countryside. When we got to the hospital, the ambulance drivers who had been working with me the whole time, the baby's heart rate was in the 110s by that point. We had a few dips into the hundreds, but to me, I felt like that was okay, given that there was so much head compression because her legs were fully together. She was laying on her back and there was a head fully in her pelvis. So that level of early decils felt fine to me. I was really hopeful that the baby was as good as he sounded. And so the ambulance folks, again, volunteer folks, really helped be my muscle. And most of the EMS stories I have are quite devastating and actually dangerous in the way that they try to take charge of a situation and discount the midwife's knowledge and skill. But these guys, without very much other than some volunteer weekend hours, they really knew how to help, and they helped get us all the way up to the OB floor, standing in front of the OB. They wouldn't leave me. They helped, like, we bypassed the ER protocols and just got right to OB. And the OB doc listened, and it took 12 of us in the room to help get her baby out. And this is like one of the most devastating memories of my midwifery career. The mother has no memory of this because, like I said, she was not, quote unquote, in her right mind. She was not conscious for this. She was fully in a post-seizure disordered thinking. She was so hyponatremic that she did not have enough brain cells actually firing. We need the salt water of our blood and our fluids in order to transmit neurological signals, and she didn't have enough of that. So she didn't lay down any memory of this experience. But there were 12 people forcing her legs apart, holding them back, pinning her to the bed, and it was a very traumatic image. And the doc was able to cut an episiotomy and vacuum the baby out within, a contraction or two very quickly within minutes of arriving. And the baby was taken to NICU, and the mom was taken to ICU without even being sutured. And they started labs on both of them, and then were able to confirm my hunch that she had this hyponatremic experience. They were able to give her IV fluids that were hypertonic, so more salt than the body normally has, in order to counteract her hyponatremic state. And she became conscious by the next morning. They give it very slowly so that it doesn't, cause damage. But she was eventually repaired and sedated, and then slowly brought back to consciousness, and stayed in ICU for about 3 days to manage her liver function. And that evening, the baby started having seizures as well, and was treated in the NICU as well, and was actually flown to a different hospital. And so it wasn't until about 4 days postpartum that mother and baby were reunited, and that the midwives got to go and talk with them again. And I was not part of that initial consult because I wasn't her midwife, but I was a part of the postpartum processing around 6 weeks or so. And I think the biggest the biggest memory of this experience was just like the shock and awe. I think the shock from the midwifery team, myself included. I had read about this, but I had never seen it. This was my first time seeing hyponatremia in firsthand. And the student and the other midwives, they had never even heard of this. And the parents, obviously, the grandmother who was there, like, it was just shock and awe, and this real sadness at having missed the miracle. Obviously, the husband was not in the ambulance. He was driving in another vehicle, so he missed the birth. The mom was unconscious, missed the birth. The baby was airlifted away. And it was just such a crazy experience, all from the cause of hot weather and hot air, and living in this trailer with no air conditioning in the middle of a hot summer. It was 106, 107, 110 that whole week. And I think she was doing what she thought was best. She was staying hydrated. And ever since then, I've just sort of made it my mission to be like, hydration without cell salts is dangerous. And so, yeah, that's my story about the air.
Have you ever had to drive through a tornado to get to a birth? Well, Chris has. Chris takes us to Minnesota, which is not known for tornadoes. But headed to this birth, There definitely was one, and it was so powerful, it picked up her car. Let's listen.
Well, I'm Chris Devins. I am a licensed midwife, CPM, both in Minnesota and in Texas. The majority has been in Minnesota. That's where I was trained. And then we moved to Texas almost 2 years ago, where I took over a birth center. So doing both birth center and home birth now, but previously all of my training, as well as the beginning of my calling, has all been at home. So that's really where my passion is. That's the thing, is I don't even remember the date, but I feel like I have a pretty good story about what happened in some turbulence, basically. So we lived in a really small town, about 4,000 people. And so this was in the middle of Minnesota, and which of course is not exactly known for tornadoes or anything, but we do get to them. And both my husband and I are actually EMTs. He's a paramedic now, but we're both EMTs on our local service. So I also had my radio with me because we were listening to that and it was going off like crazy. We're trying, to listen, because on the EMS front, even if we're not directly on call, we go out if we need to, right? Kind of in the middle of that, I had one of my repeat mamas. It was her 5th baby, and she was known to go pretty fast and lives about 45 minutes from me. And she started texting me like, pretty sure this is it. Of course, she had lots of the prodromal on and off stuff. So we had lots of like false call business. Is it, isn't it? Kind of. And I'm like going, okay, of course, during the storm, like pressure changes, like why not? Right. It became pretty evident fairly quickly, like pretty sure this is actually going to be a thing. And so as I'm listening to dispatch, the area that I actually needed to go through was right where train spotters had seen a tornado, and it was coming through the area. And the winds had really, really picked up at our house. Crap was blowing around. But they were saying that like the tornado area was about 20 minutes south or something like that. And I had to go about 20 minutes south and then about another 25 to the east in order to get to this mama's house. And so as she was making it known that it was like, I really better be on my way, I was trying to keep track by listening to dispatch and the people that were out watching this nonsense. I was trying to get behind it is what I was trying to do. Best laid plans, of course. And at the time I had a minivan, and so not the lightest but not the heaviest vehicle, but I felt pretty safe. And I'm like, I'm gonna take my radio with me so that I can stay updated. The roads there were, even though it's rural, these are like the most traveled highways in the area. So figure, they should be pretty clear, well traveled, like, not too sketchy, I guess. And so I decided to head out what I thought was kind of behind this mess. And as I was driving south, I was dodging huge branches, that kind of thing. I could feel the van like shaking like crazy. And this mama's, calling me, texting me, and she's like, okay, well, now our power went out. And they lived in a big house with a basement. And she's like, so we brought all the birth supplies down to the basement. We have the candles, like, so we can see, like, we have all the other kids down here with us. And I'm like, well, it's not great, but it's not awful. I think I'm going to be okay. I'm trying to follow this. And obviously I wasn't trying to get myself in the middle of a tornado. That wasn't my idea of a good time that day. But anyways, trying to get there as safely as I can. And we kind of got to that point where I felt pretty confident I was fine, but she was more worried about me than she was about having her baby. And I remember her texting me and just saying, you know what, we can catch this baby ourselves. Like, it's all right. We just want you to be safe. And they're in the dark in a basement, with nothing but obviously their birth kit that they had prepared. And I'm just like, that's also not my favorite. Like, obviously sometimes we miss births, usually by minutes and that kind of thing. And we always, have the, well, if it happens without us, it's everything really probably is fine, right? Those are the births where you're like, it just was so right that it just happened fast, you know? At the same time, I'm like picturing, okay, well, if I don't get there and then there is, you know, some big disaster and they have problems and no one can get to them, that's also not reassuring, right? So anyways, drive straight south and I get to the T where now I'm going to turn and go east. And I do that and I could tell that the wind shifted, like something shifted. But as I was listening to dispatch, it sounded like I should have been fine. Like besides dodging all the branches and trees and all that stuff that was all over the ground, it was more the paying attention to the debris hazard. And there really wasn't anyone else on the road, imagine that. So I felt pretty good and start driving east and I'm thinking, okay, like, you know how when you're going to a birth and you're like, okay, your you know how to get there, but your GPS is on anyways, so that you can like be telling the family, like, I am 12 minutes out. I am, you know, like, this is where I'm at. And she's like, I'm starting to feel pushy. And I'm like, oh, of course you are, you know. And I think I was about 15 to 20 minutes out, something like that, and I felt my entire vehicle got lifted up and moved like into the opposite lane, picked up and sat back down. And there was that moment of like, okay, like that just happened. Like you can't, I don't know, when you're in it, you just are like, I don't even think I believe that was just the thing. But it did happen, and then you know you feel like you're gonna vomit because you get all that adrenaline. I'm like, do I keep going? But now I can't probably go backward. Like, you know, you have your life kind of flashes before your eyes and you're like, I don't know, you know, but it didn't happen again. I kept going. It was just one of those where it feels like you're driving a bus with straight line winds going the opposite direction and just shaking, you know, the crap out of your vehicle. Everything dispatch said, though, I was like, the storm was in front of me. So anyways, I made it to their house and we had a baby within like 5-10 minutes. That actually was really quick. She did wait for me. In fact, the electricity came on and they were coming up the stairs because she's like, even though I can have the baby in this basement, it's just really not an environment that I want to be in. And I really think, of course, that had there not been this crazy tornado and all of that, she would have had her baby sooner, I would have imagined, you know. I think that obviously just kind of scared baby to stay in, even though I was impressed. She was super, super calm and just like, it's okay, it'll be fine, you just be safe. Which is fun because, you know, mama's prioritizing the midwife, even though she's doing her hardest work of her life, right? It's kind of like being on ice, you know, where, I mean, I have that too, where like you can't keep the vehicle on the road and you're like, you know, you want to turn your wheel and be in control, but like everything else in life, and what do we tell our mamas all the time? Like, we can't be in control of this. Like, you know, we don't have that ability. And the more we try to control it, what happens? Like, the worse it goes for us, right? So we got to let go and accept it. And like whatever happens. And if the baby comes before I get there, that's how it's meant to be. And if I make it there, then also it's meant to be, right?
We have to work together to figure out what to do next sometimes. And that's particularly scary and challenging in the midst of weather disasters. Here's our last story, and we're going to go to Oklahoma with midwife Katie.
My name is Katie Augustin. I've been a midwife for 5 years now, and I believe it was my first year of practice. So I was practicing with my partner midwife who had trained me. She had been my preceptor. She is amazing. She's trained so many amazing midwives. So I was so honored to also then have the opportunity to work with her. And this was a repeat client for her. Mom was a G6. So these were babies 6 and 7. Her primary delivery had been a cesarean, which I don't remember all the details, but remember it was kind of a classic snowball of interventions, hospital cesarean. So she had gone on to have, I believe, 1 VBAC in the hospital and then several VBACs with my partner, midwife. So this pregnancy was a twin pregnancy, surprise twin pregnancy, die girl twins. Mom was just about as healthy as it gets. She was amazing. I mean, just a dream diet. I wish I could eat as well as she did. She had all the things, and really had a very standard pregnancy. The twins really didn't complicate her pregnancy at all. And so she progressed well. So we were just, very hopeful that we would get her to that 37-week mark, which we did. She had gone to some pretty late post dates with her singletons. And so we didn't feel like we would be surprised if she went to at least 40 weeks, but around 38 and some change, she started leaking some fluid and called us over just to kind of check on her and see how things were going, listen to the babies. She was very confident in her decision to have a home birth with her twins, but also wanted to make sure that she was doing her due diligence and having us come check on her. So I think Amber went and checked on her, listened to the babies, and then she started contracting. And so we went over a little bit earlier than we would maybe for a singleton. But we just wanted to be there, support her. We were really excited as well. We had a great team. We had 3 midwives, 2 senior students, and 1 kind of beginner student. So we had a lot of hands on board, and we're kind of assigning roles for everyone. Mom's labor progressed really beautifully. And so she got in the tub. We had known that presenting twin A was cephalic. I do not believe we did a vaginal exam before the first twin because we had trusted that baby was cephalic and things were progressing normally, and baby was born cephalic in the tub. Really just beautiful, easy, push baby out, came up to her chest. And then this is where things got a little weird. Not with mom. She was doing great. We listened to baby B. Baby B sounded great. We just kind of let them have some time in the tub. But all of our phones were starting to kind of go off. We also had a doula who was a family friend there. And I think it was her that first started realizing that there was a tornado in the area. Now, being from the Midwest, we all were like probably a little too relaxed about the idea of a tornado because they happen and you hear the sirens go. And I actually think I don't even think we did hear the sirens go in this occasion. I think we're a little further out, but we're like, okay, well, we'll just, keep an eye on it. And we were giving mom time with baby. Baby got latched, listening to baby B, doing all the vitals, but everything was very calm in terms of the delivery. We were just giving baby B some time to get down into the pelvis and figure out how they were going to come out. And then I remember we were starting to get more messages from local area people of trucks being flipped on the freeway from this tornado and roofs flying off and some real damage as opposed to maybe something a little bit lighter. So we decided that we needed to get everyone into the basement. Thankfully, this home did have a basement. So it is so challenging in these circumstances to protect mom's birth space and to protect her mental space. We have a twin that's still in utero and a twin that's out. And we know that obviously we want to keep mom as calm and really protect her as much as possible while also kind of shuffling all of our equipment and all her other kids and husband and everyone down into the basement. And so we tried to do that just kind of as calmly as we all could. We did not get the birth tub down into the basement. That had to stay upstairs. But I remember we kind of got everyone in the basement and I went out to grab something from my car, some piece of equipment I was looking for. Yeah, I don't remember what. And I stepped outside and the sky was green and I could hear the tornado. And it was that sound, hearing the wind. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. And that I've experienced a lot of tornado warnings and got in the basement and whatnot, but hearing that tornado, that was really freaky. And so we went down in the basement and we stayed there, I want to say about an hour, and we were listening to Baby, and Baby B was sounding great, but it wasn't a very conducive environment for Mom to really labor again. She was having contractions here and there. I want to say they're like 20 minutes apart. But we also were trying to kind of speak privately, not that we were excluding Mom from our conversation, but just of like, what are we going to do? We are, we're very aware that we still are in the middle of a delivery, and that safety for Mom, for Baby needs to be our priority. But how do we, in this kind of crusty basement, make this conducive for twin B? There wasn't even really like anywhere for her to lie down. She's kind of lying on her side, but she felt more comfortable kind of being up and around. We did, but maybe before we went downstairs, so we did cut Baby A's cord so that Baby A could be kind of passed around after we'd had plenty of time for that cord to be nice and white and flat for us to get Baby A. And she nursed and passed around, and we weren't really progressing in terms of labor, but Baby A sounded great. And so I think we were in the basement for at least an hour, if not longer, before we really got the all clear to move back upstairs. And so we did eventually move back upstairs, and we checked Mom. We did a vaginal exam at this point because we started to feel that clock ticking of like, okay, now that we're out of this tornado, and I mean, tornadoes are unpredictable. They can turn around sometimes, but we felt like we were safe enough to come back upstairs. We got to get this baby delivered. And so we were using an ultrasound to try to determine Baby's position. That was part of our challenge, was that we weren't feeling like externally we could really confidently say what Baby's position was. Baby had been transverse prior to Baby A's delivery, or at least at her last appointment. And so Amber did a vaginal exam and then asked me to follow behind her. And basically, as we do the vaginal exam, we could feel that little foot and a plantar reflex just wrap right around our fingers. And it was honestly one of the cooler things that I've experienced in midwifery. Although in the moment it's a little bit frightening, but it was a very neat thing to experience. Mom was still fully dilated even after a few hours at this point, and all of the drama of getting down in the basement, coming back up out of the basement. But we did make the decision at that point that we needed to help this baby out a little bit. And so we knew Mom was still, we talked about, do we go into the hospital at this point, which we know is going to be a cesarean, especially with a mom with a history of cesarean, or do we work on getting this baby out at home? And we had all just done breech training with Dr. Stu and Dr. Hayes and Rick Fries. And so we had just practiced a breech extraction maneuver. And so we decided that we felt that would be a good option for this mom. We talked to her about that, and she wanted to proceed with that. Now, I will say all of these things that you practice in seminars and conferences, we can never really simulate the real thing. It's hard work getting a breech baby B out. It was a lot more, you just had to work a lot harder than we really can simulate in any kind of direct simulation, if that makes sense. And so, we got all ready, and Amber broke her water. So water had been intact for Baby B still. Amber broke her water. And on reflection, something we realized is that when you break the water, then you get very wet. And so that does not give you a conducive way to get a grip on Baby. And so she was working to try to get Baby down as we had mom pushing. We didn't really have great contractions, unfortunately. And so then after kind of a few attempts, she asked me if I could take an attempt because her gloves were really wet from the amniotic fluid, and that was making it really challenging. So at that point, baby's feet were very close to the introitus. And so I was able to get both of the feet and just guide baby out. I say guide baby out. It takes a lot of, you're kind of taking what the pressure and the strength of what that uterus would be doing, but you're doing it from the outside. So it's not a gentle, slide. It took some work, and it really took a lot of brain power of us making sure that we got baby through all those rotations of the pelvis in the way that usually intelligent babies do it naturally. And so making sure that baby went through all those rotations, that we got baby out. And baby was stunned when she was delivered, and it was very hard on mom. That was very painful. Baby was a bit stunned, and so, but just really needed a few breaths, and we had a great team. We were ready to do that, and baby came around really beautifully and was finally out. And so I wanted to name her little Stormborn, the character, because she really was born as she was tucked away during that tornado, and then came out in a very dramatic way. I think we had all the siblings in there still. I think everyone was pretty. It's a pretty unique experience for everyone. We did end up, her placentas were fickle, and we did end up calling an ambulance while we were trying to deliver placentas, just because we wanted them there because we were having some blood loss. Amber did end up doing a manual removal to get both the placentas out, and they were some of the biggest, healthiest placentas I have seen. It was really impressive. And so once they were out, I think ambulance started an IV on her. They were really wonderful. Started an IV and got her some fluids, and said as long as she was comfortable staying home and we were comfortable staying home, that we could do that. And so we stayed home. So really it was ended up being such a beautiful birth for both the babies, despite all the drama of a tornado in the middle. And thankfully there wasn't a lot of damage other than some vehicles on the freeway, and we were able to stay home for everything. And those babies are healthy and thriving and probably almost 4 years old now.
Time moves fast. Going back to William Arthur Ward's quote from the beginning, the realists just adjust their sails. And aren't midwives the ultimate realists? Adjusting to what's needed, no matter what the elements. I hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next week with the next installment of this mini-series.